Welcome to the Rebalance Earth podcast. Interesting conversations with interesting people. We're talking about my favorite subject, water, and I'm delighted to have Chris Walters, CEO of Ofwat, with us today. So Chris, great to see you. Great to have you on the podcast. You are CEO of Ofwat. You've worked in Ofwat for a few years, but before that, NHS. You're an economist by training. Share what's your passion for water? What's your passion for regulated industries? How do you find yourself where you are today?
Well, thanks very much for having me on, Rob. It's really great to be here. I've been at Ofwat since June 2023. As you say, I worked in the NHS for about 8 years before that. And then I was a trust buster. I worked in antitrust for decades before that. My professional background is in economics. In terms of my origin story, what really drives me, I've always sought out challenges. I've always been ambitious. I was one of the last generation of people in the UK whose education was free. Not just my undergraduate education, but kind of scholarships I got for advanced study. And that generated in me a really strong sense of duty to repay the public for the faith that it had in me, more faith than I had in myself as a young man. And economics is always a subject that I loved. My economic heritage is really, really important to me. So if you bring those three things together, seeking out a challenge in public service where economics is important, water's where the action is at the moment. But you will see that pattern repeated through my career, really. It's a realization I think I probably came to later in my career, and I wish that I'd known that about myself a bit earlier, actually.
Chris, no one can say you shied away from big problems, NHS, water. But as an economist, can you just paint a picture, the big numbers that the water sector is responsible for? Just how big is it? What is it being spent on?
So over the next 5 years, we will see record levels of investment, £104 billion, which by any measure is a very, very large amount of money.
And what will that 104 billion be spent on? If I'm thinking to like Monopoly Board, is this new reservoirs? Is it aqueducts? Is it repairing pipes? Is it all of the above?
It's all of the above. It's split between wastewater services, taking sewage out of our homes, treating it, returning it to nature, and then water services, taking water out of the environment, cleaning it, making it drinkable, and putting it in our homes. And the investment is divided along those lines. So there's thousands of kilometers of water mains that are going to be replaced. There are thousands of sewer storm overflows that will need to be upgraded. There is a pipeline of 30 major projects worth £50 billion that is building new reservoirs, large-scale water transfer projects, and desalination and water reuse and other things like that.
Not just that big spend, but what's the kind of knock-on impacts locally in terms of jobs, local economic growth?
Well, the economic consulting firm KPMG recently did some work for us, which suggested that pipeline of major projects could add £40 billion worth of economic growth to the UK economy and be responsible for tens of thousands of new jobs. So very significant benefits, as well as the benefits we will see from improving the resilience of our water supplies, because resilient water supplies are absolutely essential for productivity and for economic growth.
Well, I completely agree with you on that, and just how important water is for economic resilience. And especially now we have this sort of like 21st century economy where not only are we putting more pressure on our energy system, but we're putting more pressure on our water system. In my line of work, we like to think in sort of assets. So again, maybe I'm overly simplifying it, but if I think about the water utility industry, you have the physical infrastructure assets that have been built in the past that need to be maintained and new ones to be built, a bit like Heathrow needs to maintain a runway and build a new runway. You need the financial capital, £100 billion. Water utilities borrow money, they borrow money from pension funds. And then the sort of human capital, right? Tens of thousands of people working across to build, maintain, make sure it's running. To what extent do you think about natural capital in that equation? Is that something that is being added to that equation? Is that a helpful way to think about these things?
It is a helpful way to think about these things. Improving the resilience in the way that I've described won't be achieved by just pouring concrete. We need solutions that enable us to change the relationship we have with the water environment, so we become stewards rather than just users of our water environment. And that's why the record level of investment I described earlier includes money to kickstart lots of work in nature-based solutions, so using reed beds, wetlands, peatlands to filter wastewater safely so that it can be returned safely to the natural environment.
What's the biggest challenge? Is it just a mindset challenge that it's not been done before? Is it back to the sort of complexity? Is it all of the above?
It is all of the above. So the system I described earlier has a lot of different regulators in it, and coordinating that system to promote nature-based solutions has been very complicated in the past. The changes that the government are making to economic regulation and other regulation will help us do that better in future. There's a mindset shift as well, which is, until quite recently, the evidence base for how effective these nature-based solutions are hasn't really existed. That is something that we at Ofwat have grasped with a water innovation fund, which has ring-fenced £600 million over 10 years for innovative new approaches. That includes one particular project called Mainstreaming Nature-Based Solutions, which is a huge collaboration between water companies, environmental interest groups, regulators, governments, and other to finally establish a proper evidence base for nature-based solutions so that we can really promote the use of natural capital more in future.
And just for our listeners, by the evidence base, you mean that if normally an engineered solution is either to sort of store water or to build a water treatment plant, it's, how effective is sphagnum moss at cleaning the water? It's how effective is a restored river catchment at storing water? And I suppose, is it how confidently, if I'm the water utility in that region, can I rely on that? Is that?
That's exactly right. To give you a practical example, there's work being done at the River Wharfe in Ilkley in Yorkshire to use exactly those kind of solutions to avoid just building more tanks to hold wastewater and upgrading the wastewater treatment works. Well, let's use these nature-based solutions, reed beds, to clean the water and return it to the River Wharfe.
I mean, one of the things once you start thinking about nature-based solutions is that you sort of zoom out and think of a whole catchment system. Is it also that, I suppose, as an industry, it's about not just seeing this kind of circularity of water, but actually you're part of a bigger system, a holistic system, and actually some of these interventions also help Network Rail. They also help national highways. They might also help Manchester Airport in that example, or it might help Heathrow, or it might help Shore and Port. How in a model where at the moment you can only really charge your customers, is there, I mean, and maybe this is what this innovation fund does, is there a new opportunity for a group of people to come to invest in natural capital, and then for the water utility to treat that on balance sheet and go, this is cleaning my water, but at the same time for Manchester Airport or National Highways or Network Rail to also take benefit for that?
So one of the proposals that's in the government's white paper, which was published in February about reform of the regulatory system, is to have integrated catchment-based planning for water and wastewater investment with the right groups of people around the table. Now, it is ultimately for government and for Parliament to say how stuff gets funded, but the white paper and the subsequent changes, I think, will create the building blocks for having all the right people around the table.
And actually, see, talk about the white paper, and we've talked about Ofwat, we've talked about the Environment Agency and Defra. Can you talk a little bit about why that sort of white paper's come about, and I suppose what's the what are the timelines for the implications of that white paper?
Well, the record levels of investments we're seeing in this current 5-year period are to catch up on investment that wasn't there in the past, and that's caused the government to have a look at what the causes of that were and to recognise that the system is fragmented and complex and there are gaps and overlaps and inconsistencies between its constituent parts and propose a way of fixing that.
And so that white paper is effectively that. It's the how did we get here? And then how do we, what does the new system look like going forward? And then how do we fund it?
Effectively, yes. The white paper is a response to work that the government commissioned in October 2024, led by Sir John Cunliffe, which was the diagnosis that I've just described. Yeah. The white paper is how to treat the problem.
And so when does that come into effect, or what's the implementation timeline for that?
Well, we're expecting a transition plan to give effect to that from the government imminently. We're expecting legislation to enter Parliament as soon as is possible, and we expect the creation of a new integrated regulator as soon as possible after that.
And so in that world, does that then mean councils like GMCA, water utilities, sort of key stakeholders in a catchment can start to sort of come together maybe differently around water and think about shared problems as well as shared solutions? Because I think at the moment it's easy just to blame everything on the water. Anything that has water in the name, or just blame the water utility. At the same time, if you put all the costs onto the water utility, but there are other benefits, so flood mitigation, if what you could do that benefits a particular water utility will also benefit flood mitigation for the whole catchment. Does that allow innovation to say, well, what are new ways of sort of funding this and sharing the benefits?
Yeah, it absolutely does. One of the ideas behind integrated catchment-based planning for water and wastewater services is to do exactly that, to think differently about who needs to be around the table in order for the right things to get done, and factor in some of those external outside benefits that aren't in the reasoning at the moment, that aren't in the decision making at the moment.
I think this is the exciting opportunity where if you sort of zoom out and think at a holistic level, actually in the UK, most people don't know this, but our pension system is the sort of second largest in the world. The assets exceed the GDP of this country. And so when Rachel Reeves talks about sort of productive capital and investing in our infrastructure, that there's an ability to invest into our natural capital to not just help the water utility sector, but to help entire catchments, whether it's catchment in Oxfordshire or it's a catchment in Manchester. And as you say, there's a whole load of other benefits that go with that once we start restoring biodiversity. So hopefully in the new mental model, we do think about our physical infrastructure as well as our natural infrastructure, as well as our sort of human capital and financial. Chris, something that strikes me is when I talk to people about water, it's that invisible thing that we just take for granted all the time until it's not there, either because we turn on the tap and there's no water, or we hear about water all the time in the news. Can you just give our listeners a sense of the scale of the water industry, how much water we use every day, just how big an industry is it? And 140 litres is basically about 2 baths, or I think it's over 1,000 cups of water or tea a day. So as you say, it's hard to imagine that cleaning your teeth, having a shower, pulling the flush. I think, and having grown up in Argentina where actually you couldn't drink the tap water. So, we just take for granted we can turn on the tap, you can drink straight from the tap, it's clean. The amazing thing about the water industry, it must be the only industry that delivers you a product, but then takes your waste away as well. So just if you sort of multiply that up, by 70 million people, let's say 10 billion, am I right in saying that water needs to be treated twice a day then? Is that?
Effectively, yes. We take water out of the environment, which is called abstraction, and we turn it into safe drinking water. And then we use that drinking water, and we have to treat it and put it back in the environment so we can take it out again. So it effectively is a circular water economy. The issue is we are taking water out of the natural environment a bit faster than we're putting it back, and we need to do something about that.
And, just so people understand, when, how many water utilities are there in England and Wales or in the UK? when was the bulk of that infrastructure built? So we can kind of maybe go backwards in time and then just think about how much we've layered on top since we built it.
So there are 16 water and wastewater companies in England and Wales, and they're all geographical monopolies. So we're here in London recording this, so we are Thames Water customers. Yeah. You move out of London, you get different options. Some of those companies supply water only. So if you move a little bit further north from where we are, to North London, where I live, water is supplied by a company called Affinity Water, but the wastewater services are Thames Water Services. Some of those companies do both water and wastewater. So United Utilities in the northwest, for example, Yorkshire Water in, as its name suggests, Yorkshire, Severn Trent in the Midlands.
And when was the kind of critical infrastructure, the reservoirs, the pipes, the sewage, when were they built?
A lot of the backbone, especially in our urban areas, is Victorian. And that is an issue because a lot of our sewers in urban areas, in London, in Birmingham, in Liverpool, in Manchester, are what are called combined sewers. And that means they take not only the wastewater from our homes and properties when we flush the toilets, but they also take rainwater. And as the country's grown and we've concreted over more and more and more, that wastewater, that rainwater has to end up in the combined sewer system. And that's been an issue because this infrastructure is old, it's Victorian.
Yeah, so I think there were two things going on. I mean, if we go back to 1850 and just round figures, I think the population of the UK was about 20 million.
Yeah.
Let's call it 70 million round figures today.
Yeah.
So we've had a 3.5 times increase in population. Our economy has grown, I don't know how much in there, industrialization, consumption. But as you say, that was built on, effectively, we have a 21st century population and economy running on a Victorian backbone, sort of point one. And then point two, over that period of time, as a result of climate change, I think median precipitation has probably increased 50%, but actually the extreme precipitation, like the one we got in January and February of this year, has increased, 10x, maybe 20x since 1850. What does that mean for these kind of combined sewers? Because I think most people they probably hear combined sewer overflow or CSOs, and it means very little to very few people, maybe apart from people who work in the industry.
But what it means is in periods of heavy rain, there is a risk that the sewage system gets full and sewage backs up into people's homes, internal sewer flooding, which is disgusting and has to be avoided, obviously. So there are safety valves in the system, and they are called overflows. Safety valves, though, if there's too much rainwater in the system and it threatens to overwhelm sewage treatment works, that heavily diluted wastewater can spill into the natural environment.
And so if we didn't have that, it would back up in the system, basically. It would end up in our homes and coming back up through our toilets and sinks.
And that still happens on rare occasions, and they're well-publicised rare occasions, and the reason that they're well-publicised is they're really horrible.
Yeah, and I think this is the bit that's often, misinterpreted. My colleague, Professor Neil Entwistle, who's a sort of river scientist, was telling me about a particular catchment where it's easy to blame one utility, the utility in the area, and there are problems. If you were to hear the media and the popular press, you'd think it was just that water utility. It's actually more complicated than that. It's a whole catchment. These kind of combined sewers, we can't really deal with it unless we deal with the precipitation and the runoff. How much of that challenge is that people don't really understand that it's part of a broader connected system, and that we've had all of these changes in pressure, be that precipitation, be that the fact that we've tarmacked and paved a lot of stuff, the way we farm differently? How does that all kind of come together to make the problem worse?
Well, I think that is part of the issue, that lack of understanding that, roughly speaking, 1/3 of what ends up in our rivers in terms of treated wastewater is our own domestic and business wastewater. But 2/3 of it isn't, roughly speaking. It comes from agricultural runoff, and it comes from what washes off our roads, and it all has to be treated. And in the past, there hasn't been a coherent system for bringing everyone together who needs to be around the table to solve that problem. That's why the government published in February of this year a white paper to reform regulation of water, because that is one of the issues that needs to be solved going forward.
So actually, we've talked about the water utilities and the waste treatment, but do you want to talk about the regulators again? A lot of our audience maybe hear about the Environment Agency, have heard Ofwat on the news, maybe have heard Defra, but they're just words that maybe don't really connect. Can you kind of paint a mind map of what that looks like?
Sure. Ofwat is the economic regulator for water and wastewater services. And what that means is it's our job to scrutinise proposals that are made to us, proposals for investment and expenditure that are made by water companies to ensure that they are good value for customers and for the environment. But we don't get to say what's in those proposals. That depends on what water companies are told to do by our fellow regulators. And you've mentioned them, the Environment Agency, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, Natural England, and also what they're told to do by the UK and Welsh governments. Now, that system I've described is complex. It's got a lot of different actors in it, and there are handoffs between them, and there are gaps and overlaps and inconsistencies between the responsibilities of those actors. And that's led to a situation where not enough investment has been done in the past, which is why we've seen a step change in investment that we're now experiencing.
And maybe listeners will go, well, why do we need a regulator? That's because, to your point, if you live in London, I don't get to choose whether I'm Thames Water or not. If I live in London, I can only be with Thames Water as a utility. So in industries that have utilities, you need an economic regulator to kind of set and control the price. Is that a fair description?
Yes, it is. Unless you're a very large consumer of water, you're a brewer, for example, you don't get a choice of water companies, which means they're regional monopolies. And an economic regulator's job is to prevent that monopoly exercising its power in a way that customers end up paying too much or getting too little in return.
And obviously there was a lot of press because the way the model works, as I understand it, is that the price is charged onto the customer. So I'm a Thames Water customer. There are millions of people. We all get charged our water bill. So that ends up being billions of pounds that needs to be reinvested. And they almost have like a set profit they can make off that capital. But there's this trade-off about how much money they need to make the system work, and how much they can charge. Is that a fair description as a very, let's say, GCSE geography level of what the regulator's trying to do?
Yeah, I think it is. When I talked about scrutinising proposals earlier, that's what I'm talking about. What is the right trade-off between customers' bills, what customers are getting for their money, and returns to investors?
It'd be good to just talk a little bit about the price of water. And that's the thing that kind of captured the press's imagination, which is as part of this price review, water bills have gone up. I think in my area, let's call it 35%. In some areas, like 50%. In the context of a cost of living crisis, those are big numbers. But am I right in saying that actually that they haven't been going that much over the last 25 years? Can you describe the shape of water bills, maybe what they look like in the past, the increase, why the change, and what it might look like in the future?
Yeah, I'm sure your lived experience is the same as mine, that the cost of living has gone up for the past couple of decades. But that hasn't been driven by water bills, which have stayed pretty flat in those terms. And they've been...
Sorry, that's an important point, Chris, because I think that bit doesn't get told in the media, which is just very simply, over the last 25 years, I went to Oasis last year and I went to Oasis 25 years ago in Finsbury Park. And that has been a massive increase. I think you're an Arsenal fan, but the price of an Arsenal ticket in 2000 versus the price of an Arsenal ticket now, the cost of a holiday to Spain with your family, these have all grown up huge amounts. And a 50% inflation shock in 1 year is big, but it's fair to say, I think anyway, water bills have been probably quite low for quite a long period of time.
They have been quite low in those terms because the system I described earlier is complex, and that complexity has led to an amount of underinvestment. Now we've recognised that and we're doing something about it. Record levels of investment are needed, but they do imply big bill increases. But record levels of investment are needed to safeguard the health of our rivers, our seas and our waterways, to improve the resilience of our water supplies, and to get our water companies to really raise their game on their day-to-day performance for customers and the environment. Now, we recognise that bill increases at a time where there are challenges in the cost of living are difficult for many people. Part of my job involves talking to customers directly as well as their representatives. And I hear those concerns firsthand. I do understand them. So that record level of investment is also accompanied by more protection for customers and more support for customers than ever before.
And obviously you can't promise the future, but is the expectation that this is a sort of a bump and then after that they'll rise with inflation, maybe a little bit or more? Or is it too early to tell? Can you give us a sense of like that shape in the next 5 years?
It's just too early to tell. The system I talked about earlier has the scrutiny of the proposals and the bill setting right at the end of the process. Now, we need to streamline that, but what drives bills in future is also going to be investment needs, and future investment needs are not yet known, so it is just too early to say.
We've talked about the white paper, the Catchment-level report. We've talked about 104 billion of investments. As we step back and we get together again in 10 years from now, like, what does success look like?
So I think my answer to that isn't quite as hard-edged as those numbers. It's softer and it's more emotional. I want a water system that the nation can feel proud of. I want water companies who are stewards of that system. I want regulation that supports and enables them to be those stewards, holds them to account if they're not, yes, but enables them and supports them to be those stewards. And I want us as a society to just have a different relationship with our water system.
So I love that. A country that's proud of its water system, sign me up. Look, a lot of what you talked about is changing our relationship with water, and part of it is an industry response, is a regulator response. But there's 70 million of us, each and individually, that can make a difference. And so if I'm using 140 litres a day, like, how much should I be using a day? And, use me and my family as an example. What are some simple things that we can do to reduce our consumption?
Well, we need to get water use down to 110 litres per person per day from 140. Otherwise, we'll face a shortfall of 5 billion litres of water a day. Now, some of that is about building new reservoirs, water transfer projects and desalination plants, but most of it is about changing our relationship with water. There are loads of things that people can do to improve their relationship with water. And if I give you a few examples, you'll think, oh yeah, because people do. Don't forget to turn the tap off when you're brushing your teeth.
Guilty.
Get a low flow shower head, time yourself in the shower. Your appliances at home have almost certainly got settings that will allow you to use water more efficiently. If you're lucky enough to have a garden, collect rainwater to water your garden with. All these things I think are quite familiar to people. But what we need to do is not just tell people how to change their relationship with water, but why. So we understand that we are taking more water out of the environment than we are putting back in. And we have to change our behaviours so that we stop doing that, so that nature and the environment benefits.
Chris, that's been fantastic. Look, we all want to be proud of our water system in the UK. We can all take action. It's great to know that, you're leading Ofwat and the future of water. I know it's an incredibly tough job and it's easy to beat up the leaders of the water industry. So thank you for everything that you are doing. And yeah, I hope we can get back in 10 years' time. I'm certainly making sure that at home we're aiming for 110 litres of water a day. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Rob. It's been a pleasure to be here. I look forward to catching up in a decade.
If you enjoyed today, if you want a world worth living in, if you want to be proud of our water industry, subscribe, listen, and share. Thank you very much.